Welcome everyone to History Happy Hour, Idaho Ebony. My name is Alison Espindola. I'm the Events and Rentals Coordinator at the Idaho State Museum. The Idaho State Historical Society, which includes the Idaho State Museum, the Idaho State Archives, the State Historic Preservation Office, and the Old Idaho Penitentiary and Historic Sites, is dedicated to preserving and promoting Idaho history through programming like tonight and on-site visits. In addition to being open for visitors, we do offer a variety of off-site and virtual resources. So to learn more about what we're offering, please visit our website at history.idaho.gov. Now, before we get started tonight, I do want to start with a quick icebreaker for all of you joining us tonight. Please go ahead and at the bottom of your screen, find that chat icon, click on it, and share with me and our guest tonight what you are drinking. So some of you might have known in the past. Perfect. Oh, I see lots of water drinkers. Me too tonight. But if you have, I would love to know if you were sipping on something from one of our History Happy Hour cups. I'm mixing it up this month, and I'm drinking out of our new cups, our new mugs that are connected to our upcoming exhibition, Trailblazing Idaho, Women of Idaho, which opens on March 13th. So if you are interested in purchasing your own History Happy Hour cup or mug, or maybe one of Dr. Oliver's books, you can visit the gift shop at the museum in person, or you can shop online. So I'm gonna pop in that chat bar for you guys about that, ooh, a hoppy IPA, nice, that sounds good. Sorry, distracted. But I'm gonna put in the chat bar a link to the online gift shop. So if you feel like you wanna do some shopping tonight, you can go on there and browse. But thank you everyone for sharing what you're drinking tonight. I do wanna go ahead and get us started. Tonight's History Happy Hour is all about celebrating and honoring National Black History Day. And also talking about the history, culture, and contributions of Black Idahoans. And specifically, we are talking with and about Dr. Mamie Oliver's contributions to Idaho since she moved here in 1972. We're also going to be talking about her vast and prominent contributions to the retention of Black Idahoan history. And to welcome Dr. Oliver tonight, we have a special guest joining us, the Curator of Collections and Exhibitions, Sarah Phillips. Thanks for being here, Sarah. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. I am absolutely honored to introduce Dr. Mamie Oliver this evening. A little bit about her. Dr. Oliver was the first in her family to go to college and became a social worker. She advocated for women, children, families, and the elderly. In 1972, she came to Idaho and taught at Boise State University as the first African-American professor there. Just a few years later, in 1976, the Idaho Statesman paid tribute to Mamie's social work in a portrait of a distinguished citizen profile. In 1990, as Idaho celebrated its 100th year of statehood, Mamie saw a major gap in Idaho's history. While stories about white Idahoans were very well known, there was very little said about the African-American legacy here in the Gem State. Mamie began collecting stories of Idaho's African-American communities. She and her students examined historic records and gathered memories to understand the impact of African-Americans in this state. Mamie also worked to add St. Paul's Baptist Church to the National Register of Historic Places. Built in 1921, St. Paul's was the cultural and spiritual heart of Boise's African-American community and is now home to the Idaho Black History Museum. Dr. Oliver's life and her work to document the history of Black Idahoans are proudly featured in our upcoming exhibit, Trailblazing Women of Idaho. This exhibit looks at the amazing women, both past and present, who have laid the foundation for our future. These are women who have acted out of tenacity and courage to be voices of change, break barriers, and revolutionize American culture. These women have left a lasting legacy for our future. History is made every day. The The Idaho State Museum works to tell our story in the most complete way as possible. And just as Dr. Oliver's book helped us have a more thorough understanding of our history, we are always working to illuminate Idaho's stories. If you have items that would help us tell those stories about our past, present, or our future, I hope you will reach out to our staff and let us know. We would love to talk to you about any addition that you might have to our collection to help us tell Idaho's story in a more comprehensive, thorough way. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for introducing Dr. Oliver tonight and for sharing that little bit of a teaser about the upcoming exhibition, Trailblazing Women of Idaho, opening in March. We're looking forward to it. And thank you and welcome, Dr. Oliver, for being here tonight. I do want to start us off in our discussion. Dr. Oliver, when you moved here in 1972 and took that role with Boise State University, did you realize at the time the history that you were making?
No. It was like getting a new job. My husband had been called to pastor a church in Boise, and I came with him. And when I got hired at the school, I didn't think I was going to be making history. I thought I was just going to be working every day and getting paid a little bit.
And what was it like when you took the position? When was it that you realized that this was unique, this was different for them?
Different in the sense that the presence of people of color were minimal. I noticed that in the whole town, noticed it everywhere. And so I found that this is an interesting place, but there are things that obviously are not happening here that are happening in some other places, like the presence of people of color was not many. I noticed that in the classroom, I noticed it with my students, I noticed it in the community, I noticed it in all the stores that I would go in, and I thought, what happened here?
And it was during your time at Boise State University, if I'm not mistaken, that you really started really digging in to the history of Black Idahoans and writing your book, Idaho Ebony. Can you share a little bit about when and why you decided to write that book?
You know, I didn't do that right away when I came here in 1972. I think what happened was that as I was meeting students and students were coming into the classroom and I was giving them different things to read, because I not only taught social work and sociology, but I also taught in education. And I wanted them to begin to know what was happening in their communities. They shared where they had lived in the state of Idaho or other places. And as I tried to find information about the presence of African Americans in Idaho, I didn't see much. And then I said to students, maybe we all together can find out if African Americans have been in this state. So I asked them to think about their own communities. And I got excited about the fact that they started asking their moms and dads about who had been in their community. And so they were a part of my searching for not just the census data, but the data within communities of who was working there, who was living there. So that's when I really started to collect things. And Idaho Ebony was something that I wanted us all to find out about. So it wasn't just my finding information. Students were very helpful in checking out their communities.
And when you were working with students and digging in and finding this information, what were some of those experiences like that students were having and that you were having during this process?
Well, basically they would say that unless they had been in the military, their parents had not had much contact with people who were non-white. And so my experience said to me, if you've never interacted with people, you don't know much about them. What if people told you about them? And students started to share the stories that their parents would tell them of what they thought African Americans were like, but they'd had very limited experience with them. So somebody had told them. Remember, this is a story that goes back to 1619. For 400 years, people have been telling people about who African Americans were in America. But it was only where they lived, who they related to, the attitudes that they had. And so we got excited about, oh, there are things we need to learn, and my students didn't know much beyond Idaho, some of them, because they lived in a small town somewhere in Idaho. And unless somebody would tell them about African Americans, they didn't see them, they didn't go to school with them, they weren't interacting with them at all. So they're very limited in their experience. And so I think back in 1619, when those 20 people landed in Jamestown, 16, 20 people landed, and then they started to go all over the United States, but people would only let them do certain things there. They could work, but people in Idaho just had not had the interaction, and I wanted the presence to be looked at. So as we looked at the census, we found that we had like 50 or 60 people in the state, but they came here to do little jobs, and the railroad was a real influence on the growth of people in the state when the railroad was built. But people had little or no contact with people that were not white. They heard about Indians, but not too much interaction with them either.
Mm-hmm.
So that meant that we needed information. People needed to learn beyond what they'd heard so that they could get a sense of the existence of the culture of people in the country.
And I love that you encourage people to look and kind of explore and do the research into not only the history, but really what's happening around Idaho, around them, and that impact. And especially, you know, you mentioned the census data and being able to use that as just maybe almost an entry point into understanding there's others people and there's other cultures and people to interact with.
Yes, because you see, the census data does reflect every few years, does reflect the presence of people in different places. And if we just look at Idaho, we can go back to 1870, and the census only counted 60 African Americans in the whole state. Now, if we come all the way down to 2000, it hadn't grown too much, but we were up to 5,000, almost 6,000 in the state that were counted by the census. So the census does reflect the presence of people, but many times it didn't tell you more than the number. We don't know what they were doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's another great point, that it's just a number. From there, it's understanding and learning about what they were doing, what impacts they were making, what roles they had within the community. And you tell some of those stories in your books, and you get into the history of some of these amazing people that have really contributed to Idaho's history and the Idaho community. When you were working with the students and when you were putting these stories together, what was it that was so important to you to share? What was some of the reasoning behind not just working with your students, but putting this into a publication that could go and reach others?
Well, the sharing had a lot to do with what students found in their own communities, what their parents were telling them. And occasionally you would see something in a newspaper, but the newspapers did not always talk about the general lives of persons. The church that is in Boise we're talking about 1925. So now remember, we're going back to 1619. What happened in all those years? And so basically I was wanting students to tell me, what were your parents telling you? What were you hearing at school? What books were you reading in school? Did you study about the history of African Americans in the United States? Even though they may not have been coming to Idaho in large numbers, what did you read about where they were in the United States? So that information was good because students often hadn't even thought about it before. If you live in a community where you don't see difference, you often don't think of the importance of difference. And if somebody tells you that the difference is one way and you don't see it, you don't experience it, you can form attitudes and beliefs that may not be real about the real people.
And that's a great way to explain it and kind of provide a resource to people to learn and to see the different perspectives. I think that's pretty amazing. And you didn't write just one book about this. You wrote several different narratives and booklets and papers about Idaho history and about Black Idahoans' impact. And even you mentioned the news and the newspapers. And what that's mentioned in. And you have a whole book about Blacks in Idaho's white press, which I think is really a phenomenal book, because it really just kind of takes those excerpts from different materials and provides a really great snapshot of how people were talked about from 1863 to 1916, and what that conversation was like, and even just the growth in that time frame.
I think I want to say something about that book, because I was concerned as to what was appearing in newspapers in different communities, and that book is about that. And writers would write a story of something that happened, and I was particularly interested in observing that they tended to write about things like, this person had a party, this person shot somebody. It was all negative information. When around the United States, people were learning about African Americans doing many things, but that Blacks in Idaho's white press represents how journalists wrote about the life in Idaho, and they tended to write about negativism rather than productive and meaningful things that were happening in the lives of people. That was interesting, in that then people who had heard those stories in their homes could read newspapers and say, oh, this is the way African Americans live, but it did not reflect them as persons generally.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would encourage people to get that book and look at it, because when you read the articles written by journalists about Blacks in Idaho, you heard about parties and problems, but not about the education, the productive, the creative things that were being provided to the country by Africans.
Mm-hmm. And we've had a few questions coming in, and I know we're going to get to a lot of those at the end, but since we're talking about your books and we're talking about these stories in general, some folks are asking if there's any particular story or person from your books and your research that stuck out to you, something that particularly captivated you, their story.
Well, I observed, as I not only looked at the census, but as I went from different communities or had students to check from their communities, there were people living in those communities that were musicians. They were involved in religious experiences. They were working in families, and they were working not only in families just as a cleaning person. One woman by the name of Mamie Green, she had recipes that she brought with her from where she was from, and people wanted her to cook the foods that she cooked. And she said, your pots are not seasoned. So she used to tie her pots around her waist and take her pots when she cooked meals, so that she said her pots were seasoned. And as they enjoyed her food, the Junior League in this area has her recipes in their books, because they valued not only her ability to cook, but they decided that, wow, we need to keep some of these recipes and learn how to cook.
That's amazing. I love
That's just one story.
of her walking around with pots on her waist.
And when you go into northern Idaho, there was a family living up there, and they were buying, people were buying tickets. What do you call, you go buy the ticket now to win something?
The lottery tickets?
They bought a lottery ticket, and they won a lottery ticket, and they had land in Spokane, and they went to Spokane and bought and got the land, and they became farmers. And when they get my book on the Idaho Ebony book, it shows pictures of how they built their own property. They raised all kinds of animals, and they just had wonderful. That ticket was not just a ticket to win money, but they got land, and they used the land to farm and to raise all kinds of animals, and they sold the animals. And in the last few years, the last person in that family that died, I was able to get someone to go, and I was able to get materials from that house. And they would write checks. They were so excited to have their own checking account, and they became a family within the community. And one of the brothers, the last one that died, he wanted monies to be donated to African-American colleges. And he did that with some of the money he got. It started off as his money from buying a lottery ticket. He later was able to support Black colleges.
What a success story. What a beautiful way to continue to spread a legacy forward from one thing into helping so many people through that. Wow.
But it's very special to read about people who were in other parts of the United States, and some white families were going to bring them to Idaho so they could work. And there's a lot of material in the book about Elvina Moulton, who was a founder of the First Presbyterian Church in Idaho. And she said, I just wanted to work, and people were going to bring her so she could work. And she walked a lot coming across the country. They brought her here. When she got to Idaho, she got involved with the church. But I thought it was interesting as I learned more about her life, and you will see it in the book. She talked about the fact that when she died, she didn't want to be buried from the church because she didn't feel that people would be happy. She said, because I've been hearing people talk about the fact that I was the one Black person in their church, but she didn't feel comfortable. She wanted to have a funeral somewhere else. But we do have, and you all will be putting on display her little jacket that she wore to church, and had an influence in families. But she was very involved in the First Presbyterian Church in Boise.
It sounds,
And then
oh, what was that? I'm sorry, didn't mean to cut you off.
you go to other parts of the state, that was in northern Idaho. And then up at University of Idaho, in the northern part of the state, people weren't aware of the fact, but you'll see it in the book, that people were in college up there. And the book talks about the woman who graduated from there, and the first African-American woman to graduate from the University of Idaho, and that was many years ago. So the book, I'm not going to try to tell you everything. If you buy the book, you can read it for yourself.
That's perfect. There are an amazing amount of stories in that book of people that I had never heard about, and then wanting, reading their stories, making me want to do more and read more and learn more about their lives and the lives that they've impacted through being who they are.
Well, you know what? Some of the original people were doing things like there were barbers going up into the northern part of the state. They would go there and they would have barber shops and they would cook and do those kinds of things. But over time, because the Air Force moved into our area and people coming into the military, then the federal government hired people to do different jobs. So as a result, people have gotten involved in more than those traditional kinds of things that people thought they only knew how to do. So now we have people that have graduated from law school, they graduated from the colleges. My son is a graduate of the University of Idaho Law School. And so I think people are doing more things, and we need to know about that so you can read in the books about what people were doing initially. But now if you continue to look at their lives, people are doing some meaningful things. We finally have one or two medical doctors in the town. We have one African-American woman in the state that's a psychiatrist. So things have changed. But as they have changed, you still do not see the presence in leadership type roles where I think they could be if people would provide those opportunities.
Mm.
For example, let's just talk about Boise State for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
Boise State, and I came here in 1972, and here we are, where are we, 2021? And there's one prof that's there in the music department that's been there a long time. A nursing person came and they didn't stay. Somebody came in education, they didn't stay. So our universities still have not provided some opportunities for people in jobs that they have been trained to do. And so I began to question, why are they not hired here?
Mm.
And maybe that has something to do with some of those attitudes that my students told me about, where their families didn't talk about African Americans as people doing more than being their cooks or their maids, things of that.
It does raise a lot of really good questions and deep things for people to ponder and have that kind of mirror in front of them to look at and say, what is it and why is it?
I think it's important that we recognize that unless we can respect people for their abilities, then we will think of them historically, we go back to 1619, the whole issue of racism and people seeing some people as being okay and other people not being okay, and some people having a humanity that was worth to respect. I think some of that hasn't changed. We still are like, people are surprised that you mean you have an education? You mean you know how to do something that's not a maid's job? I've had students who were nursing students at Boise State who were given assignments through the nursing department, and they would go over to take care of patients, and the patients would say, I don't want you to take care of me. Now, this is a person trained to be a nurse. So a lot of the attitudes that people have about difference need to be dealt with honestly, so that we can receive people and respect them as humans of worth based on their preparation, based on their ability, not based on what I think they are.
Yes, for who they are, not what you think they are.
And maybe don't know much about. I need to know, we need more information about people.
Mm-hmm. Have the conversations and get to know people.
We need to stop drawing conclusions about who people are. You know, your pigment is not all that you are. I have nothing to do with what my pigment is. I'm grateful that parents had the joy of that happening, but I have nothing to do with it.
Well, thank you. Before we get going for another question for Dr. Oliver, I do want to pose a question to our audience. I see a lot of questions coming in, so thank you. Keep firing them away. I am going to pop up a quick poll for you all to ask. What other topics would you be interested in learning about? So on your screen, you're going to see a poll pop up. So if you can go ahead and submit your answers, that would be lovely. I do also want to apologize. I misspoke when I was introducing the program this evening. I said it was National Black History Day. It is not just a day, it is a whole month. So I apologize. It is National Black History Month. But thank you also for those of you that are filling out that poll. That's wonderful. We'll leave it up for a few more minutes. While we're waiting for those poll answers to come on in, Dr. Oliver, I did see a question pop up. I thought I would throw to you real quick. What was your favorite job?
My favorite job? A job I got paid for or not?
You know, they didn't say. I'd say whichever one you want to pick.
I think my favorite job was being a parent. Being a mom is special to me, because not only did I remember things that I was taught as a child, but I was grateful for the fact that I had a mom and a dad and relatives who taught me values. And the values, I thought, if I can pass them on to another generation. And so being a mom is very special. I've worked on wonderful jobs where I've worked with all kinds of persons and done all kinds of things. But being a mom for me has been a very special experience. Some people may not call that a job, but it is a job. Full time.
Never ends.
And you don't have to be rewarded for doing it, but the rewards come when you see what is happening to the children that you've influenced, not only the biological children that I have, but I have a lot of adopted children. And I'm grateful that I've had the opportunity to touch their lives, and they've touched my life.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm grateful for being on jobs where I could work with all kinds of students and all kinds of persons. But it wasn't the job necessarily that I was paid to do. It's that I could enjoy doing. And being a mom is very special to me.
Thank you.
Does that fit?
I think it fits. It seems I'm seeing some really nice responses in the chat. So I think you had a great answer there. I do want to jump back into some of the research and the work that you've done, really looking into your book, Idaho Ebony, the Afro-American Presence in Idaho State History. When you're right in your book, when the phrase Idaho history is mentioned, the average Idaho native is apt to think of the original Native American settler. Do you still feel that this is inaccurate, that people do not think of Black Idaho history when they hear the phrase Idaho history?
I think it relates to what I said earlier. If you've had no experience with people in Idaho had heard about Indians, but they'd had little or no experiences with African Americans. So thinking about them as being a part of the state was not even in the minds of many persons. So I think it's inaccurate. And I'm not sure that a lot of people would even talk about their relationship to other persons, but they just had little experiences with African Americans. So I don't think that people still think the present. I'm traveling sometimes speaking, and I'll say I'm from Idaho. You're from Idaho? There are people, Black people in Idaho? So, I think it's just a lack of knowledge about the presence that creates that possible thought process.
And you've done a lot of work to help people expand their knowledge and expand the opportunity to learn.
Well, I've also encouraged people to get their own knowledge. Right now our state has grown and people are living and doing different things. People don't need to be surprised if they see a person teaching in a classroom. If their doctor is a person of a different cultural background that they're not accustomed to being around, you can gain and expand your knowledge by your willingness to respect the people that you now are getting to know. There are people in this state that have not been here before, but I mentioned the Air Force before because many people have come and gone and many people have stayed. So they've gotten to meet people, not just in the church, but in the classroom, in different places. I can remember when I first came here, I could go into a store and people would follow me around. That's not a joke. People would actually do that because having a Black person in the store just shopping was new for people. But the bottom line is we can expand our own knowledge through our own experience. When you meet people, meet the person as a person, not a Black person, not as a white person. Meet the person as a human being and get to know them at that level. But I don't think people necessarily have had the experiences with enough people. We need to have experiences with people because we may find that other people's lives may be like ours. Everybody eats food, everybody goes to the bathroom. Folks ain't nothing but folks.
That is true. And I love this phrase, you put your pants on one leg at a time, just like I do. And recognizing that we are humans together. And we had a conversation about this beforehand about kind of sharing a broader story, about talking about the human experience. There's cultural derivatives within that. And how life and experiences are varied in many different ways in many different locations. Can you expand on that idea?
I think the first thing we must be willing to do is see humans as humans. There are persons who still, when they talk about people from different cultures or different backgrounds, they will refer to them not as humans. Many times they see them as less than human. I'm really sorry to say that people do not necessarily see African Americans as being human. That's unfortunate. So I think that being able to respect people has to do with your ability to acknowledge their worth as human. And the pigment on their skin does not describe them. The languages might be different. And the other thing in the United States, it depends on where you're from. If you come from Texas or you come from the South or you may have an accent. But I have found that people coming from the South, many people have an accent and their pigment can be very different. All kinds of folks talk different ways. That inability to respect people creates a lot of our attitudes about people.
And I think that's what it boils down to, is respecting the humanity of other humans and meeting them as a human.
For example, people will meet you. I've met people who say, I've got a Black friend, and so what does that mean to me? It's almost like you're okay because I have a Black friend. Well, that doesn't say anything to me because you don't know me. So don't assume that somebody else you met is equal to me. We're all humans, but I have a life experience. I have a family. I have people that I relate to. I have things that I believe, things that I enjoy. You want to get to know me as a human being, then we can begin to develop something. It may even turn out to be a relationship. But if I limit what I think about you by just seeing you in your face and your pigment, I will miss a lot about you.
Mm-hmm. And we also talked about name, and you had somebody ask, I would love for you to tell that story about when somebody asked, what should I call you?
Well, usually because people you see around the United States tend to refer to people in different cultural groups by a certain title. I said, if you know my name and you remember that, I will answer to you. But if somebody says, oh, you know that Black lady, or that does not describe who I am. So knowing my name is the most important. Of course, we've gone through a sociological change over the years in America, where we have had colored people, Negro people, African Americans. That's the newest sociological piece. And people have been given titles to how we should refer to people in different cultures. And I'm saying, well, since you don't know whether you want to call me colored or Black, you just remember my name and my humanity. And you may learn about the other things that are in my life, but don't start off with my pigment.
Mm-hmm.
My name, because my parents were kind enough to give me a name. Oh.
And before we get into all the questions that are coming in, thank you so much. Keep bringing those questions, and you're getting lots of shout outs in the chat as well. You have a student here from the 7374 that mentioned. They're here tonight and thanking you for continuing your message, and they're very thankful for being your student. But for the audience tonight, what advice can you offer them on how to be a trailblazer? How can they make a lasting impact in their community?
Well, if they back up on the things I've said earlier and begin to take personal inventory. How do I see humans? How do I see humans that might look different in their pigment, may speak a different language, they come from a different place? But if people are willing to back up and take a personal inventory of how they perceive people, because as I mentioned to you when I first started talking, some of my students would tell me, oh, my mother told me this, or my dad told me this. The story that saddens me, but I will share it with you. I remember in a classroom, a student said to me at Boise State in a college, I was told that people like you have tails. And I said, what? And I said, well, what do you mean tails? If we're all humans, do you know any humans that have tails? So just maybe when you were a child and your parents told you that story, you didn't think about it. But if you ever went in and took off your clothes and looked at yourself, you didn't have a tail, did you? But that saddened me, because when I heard that story, I wonder how many more stories were told to people about people they'd never met, people they did not know. And many people have kept those attitudes. That's where racism has come from, feeling that there's not the capability in people of certain cultural backgrounds. So I don't like you because you look a certain way. I don't like you because you were born a certain place or you speak a certain language. If I don't get to know you, then I don't need to have opinions about who you are unless I'm willing to put the time in to develop a relationship with you as a human being. But I won't tell some other stories. Well, let me tell you one. I used to go to the games because my children were very involved in the schools in Boise. And I was sitting at a basketball game one night, and it was in a high school. And when the team came out, there were a couple of young men who were African American, and she said, "Are those your kids?" And I looked at her, and I remember the stadium was full, and the team has more than 2 people on it. And I said, "Are those all your children?" And she just kind of looked at me like strange, but I wanted her to think about, don't make the assumption, because some of the children that were young people that were on that floor could have been my children. She made the assumption that the African Americans were mine, but I could have had some others, because I've got people in my family that represent many cultures. So we need to take personal inventory. What has been our experience with difference? And how have I established my philosophy, my values, my behaviors? And if they are negative, then I need to check out why that is true. And if I've met people that I can say, this is a human being, and respect them for who they really are, rather than who I assume they are based on what I see in front of me.
I think that's a powerful message of connecting with people and having those conversations and looking at yourself and examining your internal beliefs and dialogues and stories that have been told to you or that you have told.
I think one of the serious things that happens when you're in communities where your presence doesn't exist in many numbers. I've been stopped by police persons. And I remember a very interesting experience I had in the last couple of years, because I've been invited to go to the police academy when they're training police persons here in Idaho. And when they had their closing dinner and things of that nature. So one day I was driving onto the freeway, police stops me, and I spoke to him and I said, well, how are you? And he said, what? And I even told him his name because I sat next to him for dinner at his graduation when he finished school. And I said, and what did I do? He said, the tag on the back of your car, the little tag with the year on it is upside down. And I said, that's why you stopped me? I said, I'll tell you what, you want to change it for me? Because if anybody knows, once you stick those little stickers on, you can't take them off. And then in my mind, I had to be very careful because I didn't want to overjudge, but I thought, why did he really stop me? Well, I was probably driving a car that he thought I shouldn't have been driving. I don't really know. But I think he was so shocked that I remembered him and I knew him as a person. And I really would have loved to have been inside of his mind and his brain to see what he thought after he drove off, because he couldn't give me a ticket. He had nothing to give me a ticket for. I would love for him to one day be able to be mature enough to tell me why he really stopped me.
That would take a lot of soul searching, I think, for someone to find that, and you would hope that they would be able to do that search. Well, I know we have lots of questions coming in from the audience for you tonight, so I'm going to start firing them away, and I'm going to see how many we can get through tonight. One of the questions came in earlier when we were talking about press, especially, and you were talking about how the press were really identifying and telling a more negative perspective. When did things begin to shift in Idaho regarding how Blacks were represented in the press?
Well, I don't see as much stuff in the press about African Americans in Idaho now. So at least I'm not seeing as many negative stories. I'm grateful that we're talking tonight, which tells me that people are looking at what people do in this town. So I think I basically would like people to sometimes represent the professionalism, the different vocational kinds of things that persons are doing around the country. And I'm seeing a little more of that because a few people are coming in and out of the state. I don't see as many negative messages in the newspapers. But now when I talk to people personally, I see some negative things where people get stopped and they don't know why they're stopped. People feel that a person shared with me that they have a membership with one of the credit unions here and walked in and has been a member of that credit union for years and felt that they should be known. And this person is a professional person working in the state and said, well, if you come in here, you have to do this and this and this and this. And this person was very surprised. So I think that you've got attitudes in businesses when African Americans walk in. If they don't know you, then maybe their own attitudes come forth and they treat you according to who they think you are. So there's some things going on that are negative in people's experiences, and some of them are shared with me, but I don't see as much in the newspapers now as it relates to negativism as I used to see.
So
But
maybe,
I also,
but maybe not good.
but excuse me, but I also don't see, there are things that people are doing in this community. I would like to see people talk about what people are doing that are positive.
Mhm.
You know, did you have a school teacher that I'm grateful for those kinds of things, but there are not as many people still teaching in our schools that are African American. What kinds of things there are nurses in town? In the different parts of the state, people are teaching in the schools. They're not only teaching in the public schools, they're teaching at college level. We don't have a lot of African American lawyers, but there are a few around. Are we referring and writing about those people so that people that are living here can know that, oh, there are people here doing things that are a part of good citizenship in the area. And people need to see all persons as citizens and what they're doing rather than wait for them to do something they consider wrong and print that.
Mhm. And a lot of what you have worked on and talked about is helping people see a different perspective. Did you find it challenging, and what were some of the challenges you encountered when you were talking with people and helping them see different perspectives of life?
Ask me again, what did I see?
Did you find it challenging changing perspectives of people in Boise?
Well, my feeling is I'm excited when I see people being positive and open, one person to another. That's meaningful to me, whether it's in a religious situation or in a social situation or a sports situation. When people are really interacting in a healthy way, I'm delighted to see that. For example, we can have something at the church. Years ago, when my husband was pastoring St. Paul Baptist Church, people will call and say, is it okay for me to come to church? And I go, what do you mean for you to come? Well, does anybody come there that's not Black? And I said, this is not our church, it's God's church. But people would come and ask if it was okay for them to come to the church, which made me question their whole feeling about their own belief system. God doesn't have little crowds here and little crowds there. God loves everybody. And that's a question that I thought people were asking because they were seeing us as a Black group of people rather than as persons with beliefs that may have been similar to theirs. So that it was a challenge, but I tried to respond to them in a very positive way. And we encouraged people to be a part of the music, be a part of the worship, be a part of whatever we were doing, whether it was working with children or adults or whoever. Everybody was a part of it. And I'm glad to say now I'm involved with a church in Boise where we're probably there are not many places in our churches in this area where you have people of different backgrounds. I'm grateful to say I have people from different cultures in our fellowship. I just got a call just last week and the person said, you know, we just had a meeting in our church and we realized we're all white. And I go, well, that's your fault. Because there's nobody in your community that's not your cultural background. Well, we need to get to meet people. So what do you want to, you want to just meet people because you want to share your beliefs with them? Or do you want to meet and be with them because they're a different color or something? What's your purpose? Because if God loves everybody, then it's unfortunate that we've got white churches and Black churches. And that is really unfortunate because I say, what kind of heaven do you plan to go to since you say you believe in heaven? There won't be a Black heaven and a white heaven. That's not going to be true. So we better get it straight down here. And so the person said, well, can I just come over and sit and talk with you? Anytime. But you're not coming to talk to an African-American person. You're coming to talk to someone who may have similar beliefs. Can we talk about our beliefs? How are we working in the community? Are we serving our community? We have a food bank. We have a community center. Are you doing that? Do you want to talk about how you relate to the community? We are a community of humans. So I'm still a little bit, I'm not shocked at seeing it, but I am saddened sometimes that we haven't moved too far beyond 1619.
Long way to go still. There was another question that came in. There's a lot of people really interested in your work with preserving the church, and then well, let me read it so I don't mess it up. Can you talk about the process of saving the Baptist church and creating the Black History Museum?
The Baptist church? My church doesn't have Baptist on its name.
No, I think they're talking about the church that's now the Black History Museum.
Oh, and what about that? Actually, actually, we were concerned about the fact that that building would be a presence so that people could begin to look at the history, because when we first were able to move that building to the park, we placed in that building materials about my research. So people could go there and read and see things about families throughout the state. So it was not so much, it was preserving not just a building, but also providing information. And people didn't have to go to a church to get it. They didn't have to go to a school to get it. It was in a place that was the Idaho Black History Museum. And they could know, oh, we actually have a place that we can go and read materials, meet people, and interact with people. And so it was also preserving a building that was built by persons in the community, and they could know that information. So it was providing information for people that they otherwise might miss. Because if you didn't go to a class at one of the colleges, you may not meet or didn't see somebody in the store. Where could you really go to find out about the fact that there were people of different cultures in this state? And so we did provide that kind of information, because we do have a Basque Center. We have different centers that look at the different cultures. So it was there to give people a sense of the cultural presence with information that they could share in. And also students could come from schools and meet people and talk about people that they knew nothing about.
Just another great example of some of the amazing work that you have done within our community to really provide resources and support. And one of the questions that came in was asking about, you know, with the press as it is, and kind of going against the cultural narrative, how did you find the information about people and about their stories and lives? Was it through newspapers or was it through other means?
Newspapers. I actually visited communities all over the state and I met people. I would hear about somebody. There was a gentleman who loved to fly planes, and he was involved in doing airplanes in California. And he would compete over the planes and things he did with airplanes, and nobody respected it. And he said he would leave that state. And he came to Lewiston, Idaho, and he made displays of all of his planes, and people began to respect him. So I went to visit him because I wanted to see why he came to Idaho. So the information that I have is the census data, actually meeting people, visiting places, and talking a lot to historical people within these various places who would tell me, had they had students, had they had families, how did they feel about the history of African Americans in the state? So a lot of the information came from interviewing people, newspapers, just direct contact with people. I've traveled around this state to get information. And I think that was very meaningful because people would talk to me. And then people would say, why do you want to know that? Because if I know it, I may share it, and I did publish it, so now you can know.
That's a beautiful way to do that research, is to have those communications and that connection. And I think that's a big part of what I'm taking away from my conversation with you tonight, is it is about talking to people and
remember
from them.
I told you in the beginning, I said to my students, are you willing to go back to your communities? You may be here as a student at the college, but when you go back to your communities, what will you find out about the community? What will you talk to your parents about? What will you talk to your friends about? What will you talk to people about in your schools? So it was a matter of my just getting information to share, but encouraging them to get information they could share. So all of us became more aware, more educated, and hopefully more respectful.
Yes. So another question came in: as a young Black woman in Idaho, what organization or what community groups or organizations do you recommend that would allow me to connect with the local Black community?
Organizations? Well, we have a number of persons that identify themselves with Black churches. They call them Black churches. Unfortunately, they will be surprised sometimes when they go in and find that there are people from all backgrounds in the church. But I would encourage people to first buy my books and read them. Because if you buy the books and read them, then it'll tell you something about Northern Idaho, it'll tell you something about Pocatello, it'll tell you something about Twin Falls. I talk about the various communities, so if they get the books and read them, they will see pictures of persons. They will see families that they may have met somebody. So I hope they'll read the books, because I don't have time to talk about all of these books in this time we're sharing. So basically I would encourage people, first I said it earlier, take personal inventory. What do I feel about people who are different from myself? And see if it's positive or negative. Is it factual? Or is it something I've heard? Or is it something that I've learned to believe based on what was told me? A lot of our change will come to individuals willing to look at themselves and be willing to respect the fact that maybe they have some negative and false ideas about humans, but as they meet them, it will change. So unless you're willing to read, unless you're willing to interact in communities, we have real estates, remember, that don't sell to everybody. People should be able to buy a house anywhere they can afford to buy it. We need to live in communities, we need to interact with people, and we need to respect who people love. You know, if somebody is married to somebody that's not of the same culture, then don't be critical of them. That's who they fell in love with. So we've got a lot of personal work to do for our communities to change, for our nation to change, and for our politics to change. Much of the corruption that we see in our society comes out of bad beliefs, false beliefs, and communities that are not healthy.
And I think we have time for just one last question. And I think it pairs nicely with what you were just saying. What would you say your greatest accomplishment is when it comes to your civil rights work in Idaho?
Staying here. You know, I came for one purpose, but I didn't have to stay. Alison, it's true. That's something, you know, I could have, many places, I've spoken in different places. I could have moved somewhere else, and I've been encouraged to do that by many people. But I've been in Idaho long enough now that I've decided that I'm a citizen here. I've been a citizen a long time. And I like what I'm doing. And I see that as an accomplishment, just staying here.
I love that.
But Alison, you know what's also very special? Look how long I had to stay before people really decided to talk about it, so that a lot of people would know what I've done. You're talking about the books. The Historical Society was willing to say, let's recognize the award that I received. What's the award again that I got last year?
Pesto Perpetua.
Okay, how long did it take them? How many years have we been giving out that award? And never did a person of my cultural background get it. I don't know why that happened, but staying here meant that it accomplished an awareness of a community that's been expanded, of which I'm a part of. I see that as an accomplishment, being an Idahoan at this point of my life.
And I know I speak for myself, and I see a lot of people also saying that we are very glad that you stayed, and glad that you continue the work that you are doing. Yes, I agree with Wendy. You are a gift to Boise.
But the bottom line is, I think we must emphasize, if people really want to see the families that are still living around this state, they'll see a history of the people that have lived here, people that are still living here, that have made real contributions to this community. We have people that are involved in the schools now. I have people who were my students literally 30 and 40 years ago, who are now doing meaningful things. We're writing books. I think of Dr. Keith Anderson, who's writing books about racism and how we can change some of that. There are other people that are writing. I'm not the only one. And we need to be in touch with that information. Don't just let it sit over there at the historical building and you not buy the book and read it. You may find somebody in there that you went to school with, somebody that you know, and now you know more about their family. You know, look at the various schools that are here. What are people doing? So let's get information, but don't just read it. Let's be committed to changing personally. If I change as a personal person, then communities will change. The country will change. But the attitudes that get stuck in some places that are negative keep us from changing to healthier communities.
Those are some pretty powerful words. I love it. Thank you so much. We are just right at our time tonight. So thank you so much, Dr. Mamie Oliver, for joining us tonight. Thank you for all of you that have tuned in this evening and shared your comments and your questions. I'm sorry I couldn't get to all of them, but we tried. We got a lot accomplished tonight, I think.
Well, you can pass them on to me, and I will let people know what my thoughts are if you're willing to do that. And I want to thank people locally. Pam Limley's here, and she's been picked me up and said, we're going to make sure you're comfortable tonight. And I certainly want to thank people in the Idaho Historical Society. I hope some of my family is listening in other parts. Some of my friends are listening. And I want to thank everybody that participated. I thought we were just going to talk about my books, but I think we've talked about broader things. So can we hopefully recognize that we're going to change our communities? First, we're going to change our personal lives. We're going to change our communities. And the world will be a better place if I make the decision that I'm going to be a part of it, changing to betterness.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. And we are committed at the Idaho State Historical Society for providing opportunities like this conversation with you, our visitors, our listeners in tonight. One way we do that is by finding out what it is that you want to learn more about. So if you haven't already, please feel free to share other people you'd want to talk with, other topics you want to learn about in our chat. Anything that we haven't been able to cover, any of the comments, I will share with Dr. Oliver. So hopefully we'll have some follow-up on that as well. This recording of the event tonight will be posted soon on our Facebook and YouTube channels. So keep an eye open for that. You'll be receiving an email tomorrow with some links about what we talked about, as well as a link to where the video will be living at, so that you'll be able to share right from there. Again, for up-to-date information about how to become a member of the agency, how to make an online donation, please visit our website at history.idaho.gov. Also, to purchase copies of Dr. Oliver's books, we put the link in that chat for you. You can purchase those in the museum gift shop or online. We hope to see you at one of our sites soon. Thank you so much for being a part of the conversation tonight. Have a wonderful night and stay safe. Bye.
Bye.